Vahara 9 smelled like ozone and growing things, which was better than most frontier planets Ethan Cross had visited. At least this one had an atmosphere that didn't require constant filtration. The settlement perched at the edge of what the locals called the luminous expanse, a massive forest that glowed after dark with bioluminescent life. During the day, it looked almost normal. Almost. Ambassador Cross, his liaison said for the third time, and Ethan dragged his attention back to the present. The Kelari delegation is waiting. Scout, Ethan corrected automatically. I'm not an ambassador. I'm the person they send before the ambassadors to make sure nobody starts shooting. He adjusted his uniform, which had seemed professional back on the transport, and now felt ridiculously formal for a planet where the dominant species wore minimal clothing and could probably outrun his emergency shuttle. The liaison, a career diplomat named Patterson who looked like he'd aged 10 years in the 3 days since they'd arrived, made an exhausted gesture toward the meeting structure. Just please try not to trigger any cultural incidents. We've been doing so well. Define well, Ethan muttered, but he was already walking. The meeting structure was a beautiful piece of engineering, living wood shaped through techniques the Kelari refused to explain, creating spaces that felt simultaneously enclosed and open to the sky. Inside, 3 Kelari waited with the patient stillness of apex predators, who had nowhere more important to be. Ethan had studied the briefing materials obsessively during the 6-week journey to Vahara 9. The Kelari were humanoid in the way that made xenobiologists argue about panspermia and convergent evolution. Tall, averaging 2 meters, with long limbs built for speed and power. Their most distinctive features were ears that swept back elegantly from their skulls, longer and more angular than human ears, and eyes that saw into spectrum ranges humans needed technology to access. They were hunters, their entire culture built around the chase, the pursuit, the thrill of matching wit and skill against worthy prey. They were also, according to every diplomatic report, extremely particular about protocol and deeply offended by carelessness. The lead Kelari rose as Ethan entered. She was slightly taller than her companions, with markings across her shoulders that indicated clan leadership. Scout Cross, welcome. I am Kelari Matriarch Vea. These are hunters Torin and Sarith. Ethan managed the proper greeting gesture, palms forward, fingers spread, indicating he carried no concealed weapons. Thank you for receiving me, Matriarch Vea. I'm honored to represent humanity in these preliminary discussions. Preliminary, Vea repeated, with what might have been amusement. Yes, you determine if we are worth your people's time, and we determine if your people are worth not hunting. She said it so casually that it took Ethan a moment to process the threat embedded in politeness. I prefer to think we're determining if we can be useful to each other, Ethan said carefully. Mutual benefit tends to work better than mutual tolerance. Torin, a male Kelari with scars that suggested extensive hunting experience, made an approving sound. He speaks like someone who understands predators and prey are roles, not identities. Let's hope that understanding is genuine, Sarith said, and Ethan's attention snapped to her properly for the first time. She'd been standing near the window, partially silhouetted against the bright sky, and now she moved into full view with liquid grace that made Ethan's hindbrain scream warnings about dangerous things with sharp teeth. She was younger than the matriarch, her markings indicating a different status, not leadership but achievement. Everything about her spoke of controlled power. Her shoulders were defined with muscle that suggested she could probably throw Ethan across the room without much effort. Her arms bore traditional hunter's bands that marked successful ritual pursuits, and her legs, Ethan's tired brain, operating on 3 days of diplomatic stress and insufficient sleep, betrayed him completely. Your legs are incredible, he blurted out. The silence that followed could have been weaponized. Patterson made a sound like someone dying quietly. The matriarch's eyes widened fractionally. Torin went very, very still. Sarith tilted her head, studying Ethan with an intensity that made him wish the floor would open and swallow him directly into the planet's core. When she moved, it was with the focused purpose of something stalking prey. She crossed the space between them in 3 strides that demonstrated exactly why her legs were, objectively, incredibly impressive. "Explain," she said, her voice dropping into a register that bypassed Ethan's brain and went straight to his fight-or-flight response. Ethan's mouth had apparently decided to continue its rebellion against common sense. "I meant it as a compliment. They're obviously powerful, built for speed and endurance." The muscular definition suggests incredible athletic capability. It's impressive, professionally impressive. I mean, he was making it worse. He could feel himself making it worse, but his brain had disconnected from his mouth entirely. Sareth's eyes, one amber, one more gold than brown, studied him with an intensity that suggested she was cataloging every micro-expression, every nervous fidget, every sign of his rapidly escalating panic. Her long ears tilted forward slightly, a gesture Ethan's panicked memory identified as focused attention. Then she smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Ethan had ever witnessed. "Good," Sareth said, her voice carrying both amusement and promise, "because they were made to chase you." The words hit Ethan like a physical force. Behind him, Patterson made a strangled sound. The matriarch stood abruptly, and Torrens' expression shifted into something that looked like excitement mixed with respect. "Oh no," Ethan said quietly. "What did I just do?" Sareth's smile widened, showing teeth that were slightly sharper than human standard. "You complimented a huntress on her hunting form while making eye contact and demonstrating clear appreciation. In my culture, that is a challenge, an invitation, a statement that you recognize what I am and find it worthy." "I didn't mean." "Irrelevant." She turned to address the matriarch, and Ethan noticed for the first time that her stance had changed. She looked like someone preparing for something important. "Matriarch Vea, I invoke the ritual of pursuit. This human has acknowledged my capability and shown interest. I claim the right to hunt." "This is highly irregular," Vea said, but she didn't sound upset. She sounded fascinated. "He is a diplomatic guest. He is an adult who made a clear statement of appreciation. Unless human diplomatic protocols forbid personal relationships during preliminary contact." Sareth glanced at Ethan. "Do your protocols forbid this?" "I don't even know what this is," Ethan managed. Patterson had finally recovered enough to speak, though he sounded like he was strangling. "The ritual of pursuit is a courtship tradition among the Kalari. It involves hunting," Sareth finished. 3 days in designated territory. If you survive and demonstrate worthy qualities, we proceed to formal courtship. If I catch you and you prove disappointing, we part as respected acquaintances. If I catch you and you prove exceptional," her smile turned dangerous and delighted, "then I get to keep you." "I'm not an object to be kept," Ethan said, finding his spine somewhere under the panic. "Neither am I," Sareth replied, "which is why the ritual exists. To see if you're worthy of me and to see if I'm worthy of you. Equal testing, equal risk." She paused. "Except the part where I'm an undefeated huntress and you're a human who probably can't run 10 kilometers without collapsing." "I can absolutely run 10 kilometers, Ethan said, offended despite himself. "Prove it." Sareth turned back to the matriarch. "Do I have permission to conduct the ritual?" Vea looked at Ethan with an expression that might have been sympathy. "Scout Cross, you have the right to refuse, though doing so would indicate that your compliment was empty words, which would be disappointing for diplomatic relations." Ethan ran through his options. Refuse and insult the Kalari, potentially destroying months of preliminary contact work. Accept and possibly die in an alien forest being hunted by someone who was clearly very, very good at hunting. Or accept and somehow survive, which would at least make an interesting report for his superiors. Also, a small, stupid part of his brain pointed out, Sarith was looking at him with an expression that suggested she actually hoped he'd accept. Not because she wanted an easy hunt, but because she wanted to see what he'd do when genuinely challenged. "I accept," Ethan heard himself say. "But I want clarification on the rules and at least 24 hours to prepare." "Agreed," Sarith said immediately. "You'll be given survival gear, maps of the territory, and access to our ritual protocols. The hunt begins at dawn tomorrow." She stepped closer again, and Ethan forced himself not to retreat. "I suggest you use your preparation time wisely, Scout Cross. I've never failed to catch my prey." "There's a first time for everything," Ethan replied with more confidence than he felt. Torin laughed, a sharp bark of sound. "Oh, this will be entertaining. Matriarch permission to observe." "Granted," Vea said. She looked at Ethan. "Scout Cross, you've triggered something significant. The ritual of pursuit hasn't been invoked with an offworlder before. Succeed and you'll earn respect that will benefit all future human-Kelari relations. Fail," she paused. "Well, try not to fail in a boring way." Patterson was making quiet sounds of distress, probably calculating how to explain this in his reports. Ethan ignored him, focusing on Sarith, who was watching him with predatory intensity. 24 hours, she said softly. "Use them well, because when dawn comes, those incredible legs you complimented will run you down, and we'll discover if you're as interesting as you appear." "Looking forward to it," Ethan lied, and watched her smile turn into something that was both threat and promise. As he was escorted out to prepare, Ethan reflected that he'd been on Vahara 9 for 3 days and had managed to avoid cultural incidents right up until he complimented someone's legs. His professional performance reviews were going to be fascinating reading. The guest quarters provided for human visitors were comfortable in that generic way that suggested someone had studied human needs without really understanding human psychology. The bed was the right height, the air was breathable, the lighting adjustable. What it lacked was any sense that Ethan wasn't essentially in a very nice holding cell. He'd been here for 6 hours, accessing every file on Kelari culture the human database contained, and discovering that humanity's knowledge of the species was embarrassingly superficial. Trade relations had been formal and distant, cultural exchanges minimal. The ritual of pursuit existed in the files as a footnote with a warning label: avoid triggering unless culturally prepared. Refusal considered grave insult. Participation requires significant physical capability. "That's not helpful," Ethan muttered, pulling up the third academic paper that referenced the ritual without actually explaining it. Significant physical capability compared to what? Olympic athletes, weekend joggers, humans generally. A chime indicated someone at the door. Ethan opened it to find a young Kelari male carrying a bundle of equipment and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. "Scout Cross, I'm Varric, assistant to Matriarch Vea. I've been assigned to help you prepare." He entered without waiting for invitation, spreading out equipment on the floor with the enthusiasm of someone explaining their favorite hobby. "So you're being hunted by Sarith. That's incredible. She's legendary. 17 ritual hunts, 17 successful captures, and she hasn't accepted a single courtship offer. You must have really impressed her." "I complimented her legs," Ethan said flatly. "Yes, but sincerely. That matters. Most candidates for the ritual are Kelari hunters who know exactly what they're doing. They compliment as strategy. You did it because you were genuinely impressed without fully understanding the cultural weight." Varric held up what looked like a survival pack. "That's fascinating to us. It suggests authentic appreciation rather than calculated courtship." Ethan sat down heavily. "Varric, I need you to explain exactly what I've got myself into. The human files are useless." "Oh, your species is terrible at anthropological documentation," Varric agreed cheerfully. "Always focused on trade protocols and threat assessment, never the interesting cultural details." He pulled up a holographic display from a small device. "The ritual of pursuit is old, pre-spaceflight old. Originally, it was how our best hunters found partners who could match their capabilities. The concept is simple. If you can evade a master hunter for 3 days, or if you're caught but demonstrate qualities the hunter values, you've proven yourself worthy of consideration. And if I'm caught and don't demonstrate valuable qualities, then Sareth thanks you for an entertaining chase, you part as respected acquaintances, and she continues being selective about partnerships. Varric paused. But that won't happen with you. You sound very confident for someone who just met me. Because you accepted despite obvious terror. That's courage. And you made the compliment without understanding its significance, which means you noticed something about Sareth that impressed you on its own merits. She values authenticity. Varric pulled out a map, the territory marked in bioluminescent ink. The hunting ground is the luminous expanse, 15 square kilometers of forest. These 3 locations, he indicated spots marked in blue, are safe zones, traditional resting points where pursuit pauses. You can recover there for up to 2 hours before you must move again. Ethan studied the map. The terrain was complex, river systems, elevation changes, dense forest interspersed with clear areas. What about dangerous wildlife? Nothing that will bother you if you stay near the marked trails. The forest responds to Kelari presence, recognizes us as apex predators. You'll register as unknown but protected since you're in ritual space. Varric grinned. Though Sareth is by far the most dangerous thing in that forest. She can run 40 kilometers per hour in short bursts, maintains 30 for extended periods, and tracks by visual cues, scent, disturbed vegetation, and methods I don't fully understand because she won't explain them. That's terrifying. It's impressive, Varric corrected. She's what every Kelari hunter aspires to become, and she chose to invoke the ritual with you. That's significant. Ethan looked up sharply. What do you mean, chose? She could have dismissed your compliment as cultural ignorance, could have explained the implications and laughed it off. Instead, she immediately invoked the ritual. Varric's expression turned knowing. Sareth doesn't do anything without calculation. If she invoked the ritual, it's because she saw something in you worth testing. Or she's bored and I'm entertainment. Possibly both, Varric admitted. But even that suggests you interested her, which is rare. He handed over the survival pack. Standard gear, water purification tablets, emergency beacon if you're seriously injured, basic medical supplies, high-energy rations. You'll start with a 1-hour head start at dawn. Use it wisely. Don't waste it running in panic. Think about where you're going and why. Ethan took the pack, feeling its weight. Not heavy but substantial enough to be real. What happens if I actually evade her for 3 days? Then you've done something no one has ever accomplished, and Sareth will be forced to acknowledge you as a hunter of equal skill. Varric laughed. Which won't happen, but it's theoretically possible. More likely, she catches you multiple times but is impressed by your adaptation, creativity, and spirit. The ritual isn't just about the chase. It's about who you are when stripped of social performance and forced to rely on instinct and intelligence. Great, so I'm being psychologically evaluated while running for my life. Yes, Varric said brightly, isn't it exciting? Ethan spent the rest of the day studying the map, memorizing terrain features and planning routes. He contacted Patterson, who had recovered from his initial panic enough to send a terse message. Do not die. Do not create an interstellar incident. Do not make me explain this to headquarters. Helpful as always. As evening approached, Ethan found himself on a balcony overlooking the luminous expanse. The forest was beginning its nightly transformation, bioluminescent fungi and plants activating as darkness fell. Blues and greens and occasional purples spread through the canopy like slow fire, creating a landscape that looked more like fantasy than science. Beautiful, isn't it? Sareth's voice came from behind him, and Ethan managed not to jump. She joined him at the railing, moving with that same liquid grace. She changed into what he assumed was hunting attire, practical clothing that wouldn't impede movement, traditional markings painted across her shoulders and arms. "It's remarkable," Ethan admitted. "We don't have anything like this on Earth." "Earth," she repeated. "I've read about your homeworld. Single biome planets are so strange to us. Vahara 9 has 7 distinct ecological zones. The luminous expanse is considered the most forgiving." She glanced at him. "You're not sleeping." "Surprisingly difficult to sleep before being ritually hunted." "That's reasonable." Sarith was quiet for a moment. "I wanted to explain something before tomorrow. The ritual isn't about harming you. It's not combat or threat. It's about seeing who you are when comfortable performance isn't possible. By chasing me through a forest. By creating a situation where your instincts and creativity are tested authentically." She turned to face him fully. "I've been courted by 17 Kalari hunters, all skilled, all confident, all absolutely certain they were worthy partners. And every single one revealed themselves to be interested in the status of partnering with me, not in actually knowing me as a person." Ethan processed this. "So you use the ritual to filter out people who want you as a trophy." "Exactly." Sarith's expression softened slightly. "Your compliment was clumsy and culturally uninformed. But it was also genuinely appreciative without expectation. You noticed something about me and said so without calculation. That's rare. I was also exhausted and not thinking clearly. Sometimes that's when people are most honest." She looked back at the forest. "I don't expect you to succeed tomorrow, Scout Cross. You're not trained for this, and I am very, very good at what I do. But I'm curious to see what you'll attempt, how you'll adapt, and whether you'll surprise me." "No pressure or anything," Ethan said dryly. Sarith laughed, and it sounded genuinely amused rather than predatory. "Get some sleep. Dawn comes early and you'll want every advantage available." She moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I hope you prove interesting. Most of my life is very predictable, and predictable is boring." After she left, Ethan stood on the balcony for a long time, watching the bioluminescent forest breathe with light, and wondering if he'd completely lost his mind or accidentally stumbled into something remarkable. Probably both, he decided, and went to get whatever sleep he could manage before dawn arrived and everything changed. The forest at dawn was a different creature than the bioluminescent wonderland of night. In daylight, the luminous expanse revealed itself as crystalline trees reached toward a sky painted in unfamiliar colors. Ethan stood at the designated starting point, survival pack secured, heart racing despite his attempts at calm. Varric had escorted him to the edge of the hunting ground, offering final advice that amounted to "don't die in a boring way." The young Kalari's enthusiasm would have been encouraging if it wasn't so clearly focused on the entertainment value of watching a human get systematically hunted. "You have 1 hour, the timekeeper announced, a older Kalari who handled ritual officiating with grave dignity. "The huntress Sarith will begin pursuit at the mark. The boundaries are clearly defined. Crossing them results in automatic disqualification. The safe zones are marked and will provide temporary sanctuary. Begin." Ethan ran. His first instinct was to simply put distance between himself and Sarith as quickly as possible, but Varric's advice about not wasting the head start in panic kicked in. He slowed to a sustainable pace, heading toward the river system marked on his memorized map. Water would mask his scent, provide options for changing direction, and the sound might cover his movement. The forest was alive with sounds he didn't recognize, chirps and rustles, and distant calls that might have been communication or territorial warnings. The crystalline trees caught sunlight and refracted it in ways that created shifting patterns of light and shadow. Beautiful but disorienting. Ethan focused on navigation, using the river as his primary landmark. When he reached it after 30 minutes of steady jogging, he paused to catch his breath and assess. The water glowed faintly even in daylight, some property of the microscopic life within it creating a permanent luminescence. The The river was shallow here, maybe knee-deep, with a rocky bottom that would leave minimal tracks. Ethan waded in, moving upstream for a kilometer before emerging on the opposite bank. Then he deliberately created an obvious trail heading west before carefully backtracking and actually heading north. It was simple, probably wouldn't fool Sarith for long, but it might buy him time to reach the first safe zone. The hour mark passed while he was climbing through a section of forest where the trees grew close enough to move between them without touching the ground. Ethan's hands were already torn from the crystalline bark, but the elevation gave him perspective on the terrain and made tracking him harder. Or so he hoped. He reached the first safe zone, a clearing marked with traditional stones, with what felt like minutes to spare. The moment he crossed into the designated area, he felt something shift. The forest's ambient sounds changed pitch slightly, as if acknowledging the sacred space. Ethan collapsed against one of the marker stones, drinking water and forcing himself to eat despite having no appetite. 2 hours maximum in the safe zone, Varric had warned. Use it for recovery, not complacency. He lasted an hour and 45 minutes before he heard movement at the clearing's edge. Sarith emerged from the forest without apparent effort, not even breathing hard. She'd been running for, Ethan checked his chronometer, just under 3 hours total, and looked like she'd taken a casual morning stroll. She stopped at the safe zone boundary, respecting its protocols, and studied him with those intense mismatched eyes. "Interesting choices," she said conversationally. The river was predictable but well executed. The false trail westward was clever. The tree travel showed creativity I didn't expect. She tilted her head. "You're bleeding." Ethan looked at his hands. The crystalline bark had shredded his palms pretty thoroughly. Hazard of climbing alien trees. Use the medical supplies. Infection would end the ritual prematurely. She sat down just outside the safe zone boundary, apparently content to wait. "You have 15 minutes left in Sanctuary. I thought you might want to talk." "Is this normal?" The hunter sitting down for conversation. "No," Sarith admitted. "Usually I track in silence, catch my prey within the first day, and evaluate their response to capture. But you're not Kelari and I'm curious." She gestured at his hands. "Clean those wounds while we talk. I want you functional for the rest of today." Ethan pulled out the medical kit, applying antiseptic that stung impressively. "What do you want to talk about?" "Why you accepted the ritual." Sarith's expression was genuinely curious. "You could have refused, could have claimed cultural ignorance, could have let your diplomatic colleague negotiate an alternative. Instead, you accepted almost immediately. Why?" Ethan considered his answer while bandaging his hands. "Partly because refusing seemed like it would damage diplomatic relations. Partly because I was angry at the implication that my compliment was empty words when it wasn't." He paused. "And partly because you looked like you actually wanted me to accept, and I was curious why." "That honest answer," Sarith said approvingly. "Most candidates would have pretended it was about honor or courage or impressing me. You admitted to multiple motivations, including curiosity. That's refreshing." She looked up at the canopy, where morning light filtered through in shifting patterns. "I'm 28 standard years old. I've been considered among the best hunters of my generation since I was 16. And I'm desperately bored of being courted by people who want to partner with a legend, rather than a person. So you use an exhausting ritual to filter them out." "I use an exhausting ritual to see who they are when the performance stops. When they're tired, scared, pushed beyond their comfort zone. That's when truth emerges." She looked back at him. "You're not performing right now. You're just trying to survive and understand. That's interesting. Interesting enough to let me live." "I'm not trying to kill you," Sarith said, sounding offended. "I'm trying to see if you're worth getting to know. There's a difference." She stood fluid and graceful. "Your sanctuary time is ending. I suggest you run." Ethan ran. The second chase was harder than the first. His legs were already tired, his hands hurt despite the bandaging, and knowing Sarith was actively pursuing him added psychological pressure that drained energy faster than physical exertion. He tried more complex evasion, doubling back, climbing, using dense vegetation to break line of sight, but she found him anyway. When she caught him the second time, it was at the edge of a small stream. Edhan barely registered her presence before she was simply there, moving from the forest like she'd materialized from shadows. This time, instead of running, he turned to face her. "You keep finding me," he said, breathless and exhausted. "How?" Sarith stepped closer, studying him with that focused intensity. "Your people think in terms of individual signs, footprints, scent, disturbed vegetation. We think in terms of patterns. The forest tells stories if you know how to read them. You're writing a very loud story, Scout Cross." "Ethan," he said, "if you're hunting me, you should probably use my first name." "Ethan," she repeated, testing it. "I'm catching you because you're still thinking like someone hiding rather than someone moving with purpose. You react to terrain instead of using it strategically." She reached out, adjusting the strap on his survival pack that had been digging into his shoulder. "You're learning, though. Your evasion attempts are getting more sophisticated." "Is that good enough? For 2 hours into a 3-day ritual, it's impressive." She stepped back. "Keep moving, Ethan. I'll give you another head start since you faced me directly instead of running immediately. That shows courage." The pattern repeated throughout the day. Ethan would run, evade, try increasingly desperate strategies. Sarith would find him with apparent ease. But each time they encountered each other, they talked. She asked about human culture, about Earth, about what made him choose diplomatic work. He asked about Kelari society, about her experiences as a legendary hunter, about whether she ever wanted to be something other than what everyone expected. By the time night fell and the forest began its bioluminescent transformation, Ethan was exhausted in ways he hadn't known were possible. He'd reached the second safe zone, a cave system that glowed with phosphorescent fungi, and was seriously considering just sleeping there and letting Sarith find him in the morning. She found him before he could make that decision, entering the cave with a pack of her own. "I brought food, real food, not those terrible rations." They ate in silence for a while, the bioluminescent fungi providing enough light to see each other's expressions. Ethan noticed Sarith looked tired too, though nowhere near his level of exhaustion. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said finally. "If you're this good at hunting and you've caught me multiple times today, why are we still doing this? You've already proven you can catch me whenever you want." Sarith was quiet for a long moment. "Because catching you was never the point. Understanding you is the point. Seeing how you respond when challenged, how you adapt when strategies fail, how you interact with someone who could harm you but chooses not to." She met his eyes. "You've been hunted for 1 day. You're exhausted, injured, and you've failed every evasion attempt. And yet you keep trying new approaches. You ask genuine questions when we talk, and you haven't once blamed me for your situation even though I'm the one who invoked the ritual. You invoked it because I was culturally ignorant. I invoked it because you complimented me sincerely, and I wanted to know if that sincerity extended beyond words." She smiled, and it was less predatory than before. "It does. You're exactly as honest when running for your life as you were in that first meeting. That's rare, Ethan." He absorbed this. "So what happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow we continue. You keep evading, I keep finding you, and we both discover if this interesting connection survives the full ritual." She stood, preparing to leave. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be harder." "How could it possibly be harder?" "Because tomorrow I stop giving you head starts," Sarith said, and her smile turned mischievous. "Sleep well, Ethan." After she left, Ethan lay in the bioluminescent cave, every muscle screaming protest, and realized he was actually smiling. This was insane. This was terrifying. This was unlike anything he'd ever experienced, and he couldn't wait to see what tomorrow brought. The third day began with Ethan waking to find Sarith sitting at the cave entrance, silhouetted against the dawn. She'd apparently been there for a while, just watching the forest wake up. "You didn't run during the night," she observed without turning. "Didn't seem sporting," Ethan said, sitting up and immediately regretting every life choice that had led to his current state of total physical destruction. "Also, I was too tired to move." "Honest as always." She stood, offering him a hand up. "Today is different. No head starts, no safe zones you haven't earned. But also," she hesitated, and Ethan realized it was the first time he'd seen her uncertain. "Also, I want to try something unconventional." "More unconventional than ritually hunting a human diplomat." "Yes." Sarith pulled out her map, spreading it on the cave floor. "There's a sacred site at the valley's heart. A place where hunters go to meditate on successful pursuits and honor worthy prey. I want to race you there. Not hunter and prey. Just two people running, seeing who reaches it first." Ethan stared at her. "That's not how the ritual works. The ritual has never involved an off-worlder before. We're already rewriting tradition." Her expression turned challenging. "Unless you're too tired." "I'm absolutely too tired," Ethan said. "But I'm also not going to let you question whether I can keep up." He studied the map. The sacred site was approximately 8 kilometers away through complex terrain. "What happens if I reach it first?" "Then you get to decide the nature of our relationship going forward. Partner, friend, respected acquaintance who shares interesting conversation. Your choice. And if you reach it first." "Same thing," Sarith said, "but I choose." She met his eyes. "Either way, we end the ritual today. 3 days was tradition, but tradition was designed for Kalari hunting Kalari. You've already shown me what I needed to see." Ethan should have been relieved. Instead, he felt oddly disappointed that it was ending. "All right, race to the sacred site. When do we start?" "Now," Sarith said and took off running. Ethan cursed and followed, his body screaming protest that his mind overruled. The race was glorious and terrible in equal measure. Sarith was faster, significantly faster, but Ethan knew the terrain now, had spent 2 days learning to read the forest's patterns. He took risks she wouldn't, using momentum and gravity in ways that prioritized speed over safety. They moved through the bioluminescent forest as dawn light slowly overtook the night's glow, creating a shifting landscape of colors that shouldn't exist. Ethan used every trick he'd learned, every shortcut he'd memorized, every desperate adaptation that 2 days of being hunted had taught him. He crossed the stream by jumping from rock to rock, risking a broken ankle for the time saved by not waiting. He climbed through the crystalline trees, even though his hands were raw and bleeding again, because the elevated route was more direct. He ran until his lungs burned, and his legs felt like they might simply stop working from exhaustion. And somehow, impossibly, when he crashed through the final barrier of vegetation into the sacred clearing, Sarith was there waiting. She'd beaten him by maybe 30 seconds, was breathing hard for the first time since the ritual began, and her expression was the closest to pure joy Ethan had ever seen on her face. "You almost caught me," she said, sounding delighted. "In 2 days, you went from someone who couldn't evade me for 6 hours to someone who almost matched me in a direct race. That's remarkable." Ethan collapsed onto the ground, too exhausted to care about dignity. "You're still faster. But you're smarter about terrain and more willing to take risks." Sarith sat beside him, both of them breathing hard. "That was the most fun I've had in years." They sat in silence for a while, recovering. The sacred site was a clearing marked with ancient stones, carved with symbols Ethan couldn't read. The bioluminescent forest surrounded it like a protective embrace, and the morning sun was creating light effects that looked more like art than nature. "So," Ethan said finally, "you reached the site first. What do you choose?" Sarith was quiet for a long moment. "What would you have chosen if you'd won?" "Honest answer. Always." Ethan turned to look at her directly. "I would have asked for the chance to know you beyond this ritual. To understand the person underneath the legendary huntress. To see if what we've found in these 3 days of controlled chaos could exist in normal circumstances too." Sareth's expression did something complicated. Surprise, pleasure, something that might have been relief. That's exactly what I would have chosen, she admitted. I came into this ritual expecting to find out if your compliment was authentic. Instead, I found someone who adapts under pressure, asks genuine questions, doesn't blame others for his circumstances, and keeps trying even when success seems impossible. She paused. And someone who appreciates that my legs are incredible for reasons beyond aesthetics. They really are impressively engineered, Ethan said, and she laughed. Your legs are pretty incredible too, Sareth said. Slower than mine, but they brought you exactly where you needed to be. She stood, offering him a hand again. Come on. We should return and inform the matriarch that the ritual concluded successfully. Successfully meaning what exactly? Successfully meaning I'm claiming you as a partner candidate, pending your agreement. She pulled him to his feet. Traditional Kalari courtship involves several more ritual challenges, but we can space those out so you have time to recover. And maybe next time I'll let you hunt me. Ethan's brain took a moment to process that image. You'd let me hunt you. Fair is fair. If we're partners, that means equal testing. I want to know if you're as good at pursuing as you are at evading. Her smile turned mischievous. Though I should warn you, I'm very good at not being caught. They walked back toward the settlement together, and Ethan noticed the forest responded differently to them as a pair. The dangerous creatures that had avoided him during the hunt now seemed almost curious, observing from safe distances. The bioluminescent plants pulsed in patterns that Sareth claimed indicated approval from the forest itself. One question, Ethan said as they approached the settlement's edge. Was that compliment about my legs authentic, or are you just being kind? Sareth stopped walking and turned to face him fully. Ethan, I've never been kind in my entire life. If I say your legs are incredible, it's because they carried you through 3 days of the most intense physical and mental challenge you've probably ever experienced. And they did it without giving up even when giving up would have been completely reasonable. She reached out and took his hand, a gesture he'd learned was significant in Kalari culture. You're interesting, you're genuine, you adapt and persist and ask good questions. And yes, your legs are incredible. Not for the same reasons mine are, but for reasons that matter just as much. The settlement was visible ahead, and Ethan could see Kalari gathering, clearly waiting to hear the ritual's outcome. Patterson was there too, looking like he'd aged another 10 years. I'm going to kiss you, Ethan said, and watched Sareth's eyes widen in surprise. That's very forward for someone who just spent 3 days being hunted. I've learned from the best, Ethan said, and closed the distance between them. The kiss was observed by approximately 30 Kalari and one horrified human diplomat, and would apparently become part of settlement legend within the week. Sareth kissed him back with the same focused intensity she applied to everything, and when they finally separated, she was smiling in a way that looked less like a predator, and more like someone who'd finally found something worth catching. Well, she said, that's one way to conclude a ritual. I contain multitudes, Ethan replied, and she laughed so genuinely that several observing Kalari looked startled. The matriarch met them at the settlement's edge, her expression somewhere between amused and impressed. Huntress Sareth, Scout Cross, the ritual is concluded. Successfully concluded, Sareth confirmed. I claim Ethan as a partner candidate. He has proven worthy through adaptation, courage, and remarkable persistence despite significant physical disadvantage. And you accept this claim, Scout Cross? Enthusiastically, Ethan said, and ignored Patterson's quiet sound of despair. Though I'd like formal confirmation that future courtship challenges won't begin with 3 days of being hunted, I need recovery time. Fair, Sareth agreed. Next time I'll give you a week's notice before I make you climb a mountain or navigate a maze or fight me in ritual combat. Those are the other courtship challenges. Some of them, she said cheerfully. Don't worry, you'll be great, probably. The matriarch's expression suggested she was trying not to laugh. Then let it be known that Huntress Sarith and Scout Ethan Cross have completed the ritual of pursuit with mutual acknowledgement. May their partnership prove as interesting as its beginning. As they walked into the settlement together, Sarith's hand still in his, Ethan reflected that he'd come to Vahara 9 expecting to conduct preliminary diplomatic assessments and file routine reports. Instead, he'd complimented someone's legs and ended up in a 3-day ritual hunt that concluded with him kissing an alien huntress in front of half her settlement. His performance reviews
De regreso, de regreso. Mira una Eva Wong. Me mama que hagan cosplays de Resident Evil, está perro, está perro. ¿Dónde está la pinche Maki?
Cosplay de León Kennedy.
No, mames, no, ni de pedo. No soy mucho de hacer cosplays, la verdad.
Que ser Maki, con que tenga cicatriz.
Sí, con que tenga una cicatriz está bien. Pero si es una Maki...
¿Cuándo vas con cosplay de Uber de Las Vegas, bro? ¿A cuánto por el chiquito?
¿Para cuándo vas con tu cosplay? Yo digo que estaré bien un sábado, ¿no? Esta no la conozco. Mizuki. Ni puta idea, güey, no la conozco. Ah, es un streamer. Mira, es un streamer. Esta perra. Sí, es un streamer, es un streamer. Ah, mira, las luchitas, güey.
Es el alter ego del James.
¿Quieren ver las luchitas o le seguimos?
Canal de un streamer que se llame Tamatin jajaja. Es de enanos va. Donde está el K-pop.
Oh my god, eso no existe ahí, patus. Eso aquí no existe, güey. No digas mamadas.
Sí, no, síguele.
The Ars. Lo que tú no sabes es que están echando un pajazo, güey. A la verga, míralo, güey.